Captain, here is a reminder. Take your meds.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Into the Geekverse. And tonight we're doing things a little bit differently. As you can see, David's not here with me right now, but what's going on is that we actually recorded an interview on Friday with Lars Christensen, and he is the chairman of Concordium, and they've got some really cool stuff going on with blockchain. And so things are a little different, but I just wanted to let you all know that because the reason that we recorded it is because it's 4 a.m. right now for Lars. And so we recorded this. Unfortunately, because Lars is on the other side of the world, there are some connection issues. Bear with it when you hear some skipping and dead air. Lars does come back. And so just stay tuned and check out this interview, man. They've got some really, really cool ideas for blockchain. And I know you geeks love blockchain. So here you go. Check it out.
Welcome to the show. Geek Insider presents Into the Geekverse, the place to get an inside look at movies, comics, games, tech, and everything exciting going on in the Geekverse. Join Matthew Harris and David King as they take a deeper look at the good, the bad, and the downright terrible things our Geekverse has to offer. With live chat, geek news, special guests, and lots more. So sit back, relax, and join us for a peek into the Geekverse.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Into the Geekverse. This week, we have a special guest from across the world. So we're recording in advance and for the broadcast for Sunday. But feel free to drop down the comments in the YouTube. We're always looking forward to hearing from you. And we're talking with Lars Christensen. And he's got my apologies, Lars Christensen. And he has some really cool ideas about blockchain and how it can be used. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I actually spent most of my life in traditional finance. I co-founded one of the first internet trading platforms that we launched in the late 90s and have been running that until I sold my last shares in 2018. But on the side, I also got interested in Bitcoin fairly early on. I had some nice anarchistic friends that brought it to my attention and said, this you would like. So I actually followed that space since 2011, 2012. Also, mostly just following and investing a little bit in the early days, and subsequently getting more and more interested in the whole blockchain idea and how we can really make this into something big. Along the way, I got my own ideas about what the perfect sort of layer one blockchain, because that's what we're building at my current company, Concordium. What would it really take for this to gain mainstream adoptions? And hence we worked on some very early ID solutions, which I think is an absolute critical thing to have if you want mainstream adoption, certainly in the financial sector, but also in many other corporate contexts. Anonymity is not really on, and I knew that because that was what I was dealing with in my day job at the bank, where I was CEO for about 20 years. So I was kind of getting a little bit schizophrenic with this sort of completely Wild West early days of blockchain, although I have sympathy for it, a bit of an
Just a second, Lars. It looks like you.
But at the same time, having my day job where we're inundated. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were kind of freezing up there for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, but you look okay now.
All right. Well, let's see how it goes. So I got this kind of double input. The day-to-day work as the CEO of a traditional, or not that traditional, but internet-based retail investment bank. and the blockchain space and the crypto space. So I got quite convinced that this regulation that we know from the TradFi world would ultimately migrate to this area as well. And I think while that was, not the most popular message back in 15, 16, 17, I think most people come around to really see that this is happening and it's kind of inevitable, right? So I started the Concordium late 17 and sort of got really to work in early 18. And the whole idea there is to try to make a blockchain that takes the best of what a distributed blockchain is. And there's a lot of great things and a lot of things that certainly can improve also traditional finance in many ways and many other processes. But at the same time, trying to combine it with respect for sort of the requirements that society around us will have. And those are quite clear in my view. Anonymity is a non-starter in sort of the old world and right. In the regulated world. So we have an ID layer at the entry point to after sort as a layer 2. Availability, build a very strong science team because the crypto in crypto is cryptography, right? You need to understand this stuff really in depth to build solid solutions. So this blockchain is a distributed blockchain with all of the standard attributes, but also a better balance between ID accountability, but also privacy, where that is a reasonable expectation, and then trying to build something that's truly scalable, so you don't have to continuously rely on layer 2 solutions to make the layer 1 work because of its lack of scalability and high fees, etc. So that's been an interesting journey the last 4 or 5 years, and of course I'm now keeping most of my attention at this space because I'm out of the traditional finance space. But I think having a foot pretty deep in both camps probably give you a perspective that I think is needed for this industry to really mature and as I said, get mass adoption, right? Because we need the world to build on blockchain. We've got to get beyond sort of the early use cases and the small communities we have, although they're growing. But there's still a long way to the size of what's going on in the rest of the world. And I truly believe that well-built blockchains can add value to nearly any process that includes data. And to be honest, what business process doesn't include data today, right? So that's kind of our vision for it, to make a true blockchain, true to the DNA, but with respect and readiness for compliance with the regulation that for sure is coming our way, and we're already seeing it. But if anybody doesn't like it, I'm sorry to say it's going to get much worse, because we saw it developing over decades in the traditional finance industry, and it never stops. Once you think you're there, then the next level of regulation will come. So this is a challenge, I think, for an industry that maybe doesn't quite have that understanding and maybe doesn't have the experience in many cases of how that kind of thing rolls out and works. But you can rest assured that it will happen. And organize according to the powers that be and how they like to run things.
Definitely, definitely, and that's one big thing, Lars Sire, is that the average investor in cryptocurrency right now, and not the average, but the average Joe investor, they have no idea what blockchain is. They just know it's a part of crypto. They've got the blinders on. They don't understand what all it could be used for, what all the potential is out there. And, for those of you that are listening that don't know what blockchain is, in a nutshell, it's a decentralized ledger of transactions across peer-to-peer networks. And it is mostly used for the backbone of cryptocurrencies, but because of the decentralized ledger portion of this, there's so many possibilities in the legal field. and as far as doing transactions in real estate, doing your wills and contracts. But Lars, Concordium, you guys have got an idea to take blockchain more in the geek field, but you've got some ideas that just share with the audience. What do you think the possibilities of blockchain are for the gaming world?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on your description, I would say if you sit out there and you don't really know what a blockchain is, just think of it as a database. I mean, a blockchain is a database, but it's just a very secure database. And the reason it's very secure is that a lot of people have a copy of the database. So if somebody tries to manipulate it, then, all the other guys going to raise their hand and say, hey, that's not what it says in our database. And that's completely different to, for example, the database of a bank where, if you're dealing with my bank, I own that database. In principle, I can manipulate it. I can delete it by mistake. I can get hacked. So I would say the simplest way to look at a blockchain is it's a database, and it's a very secure database because of the fact that many people kind of control instead of one entity. So that can be used for a lot of things, right? Because that creates trust, that you can trust the data, right? Much more than you can with an individual counterparty that in good faith or in bad faith or with no ill intentions can still make mistakes in the ledger and can delete stuff and can manipulate stuff in bad faith, etc. So I think that's the important thing. And what that really offers you is if you have anything where you want to secure your data 100%, well, then the blockchain is the best solution you have.
Right.
And once you've done that, you can also register the ownership of that data very accurately. Either Matthew owns it, or David owns it, or I own it, or have it under. And we can pass it between us, and who controls the data, and again, I think if you look at a big gaming company today, well, you're actually in the hands of the game publisher, right? You have one central point of failure there, which if that game publisher goes bankrupt or tries to print more machine guns, and he says he does, he can in principle do anything too. So you need to trust him, right? And it's funny that you have sort of a pushback on the banks. Oh, we don't trust banks. We think they could do all sorts of things. So I want control of my data. But when you're in gaming, you're in exactly the same position. All of the in-game assets and in-game economy, you have now given over all the control to a central party there. And I think that's interesting that people can't see that that's exactly the same thing, or many people can't see it.
Right.
And a lot of gamers actually push back a little bit on blockchain. Now, I don't get that at all, right? Because what a blockchain could offer in the gaming world is that if you buy something in that game, you really can register it and know that you own this whatever tool or whatever thing you wish to have in that game, right? If you want to pass it to somebody else and maybe one day pass it to another game, it's yours to do so. If you want to have a monetization inside an inside game economic, that economic will be much more secure because, I will own my in-game tokens with much more clarity on a blockchain than if I'm relying on the database of a game publisher. So I understand 100% why the games have some pushback against because it's a little bit like the banks. It's perceived to have a little bit of pushback against that because if you own the in-game economy in a big game, of course you don't want to give it away, right? But if you're the gamer, I think it's a very great proposition that you get much more control over the stuff that you're spending your in-game money on, right? So I think just like many other processes in gaming, it can add security to the users. It can add very clear distinctions of who owns what. You can be 100% sure if somebody says there's 1,000 machine guns, there is 1,000 machine guns and not 2,000, right? So there are many things where I think that the gamer himself should embrace this, right? But as I said, if you're on the other side of the coin and you sit with that control over the game, totally different story, right? But that's the same as any sort of incumbent sitting on the economics in whatever system we're talking about, right? So that's my key message sort of to gaming. If you want that higher degree of control, that clear registration, that many other and who has them, I think blockchain has a lot to offer. I don't think games per se need blockchain, just like I don't think a metaverse per se needs a blockchain. We like to sort of jump on all these things in the industry and say, blockchain, metaverse, it's the same thing. It's not. We've had metaverses for decades, right? Second Life is a metaverse. The Sims were a metaverse. Most games are a metaverse. Where you use the blockchain, it has nothing to do with the game or the metaverse necessarily. It has something to do if you want to secure the economics inside that metaverse, and maybe want to introduce ID inside a metaverse, that if you want to speak to somebody in there and you're dancing around a dance floor or something, maybe you wouldn't ask for a passport in the real world, right? But if you get into a serious business conversation or something, and maybe value passes between you, then it's quite right. And that's the kind of infrastructure piece that Concordium, right? Which I think is much needed, because people are far too naive and trusting of all these single points of failure, be it in gaming or anywhere else, right?
Definitely.
So that's my take on that.
Well, I think a big thing, and I don't know if this has been in your thinking. I have an idea that it has been, because a big part of the cryptocurrency platforms is KYC, know your customer. And that, to me, could be translated to the gaming world, especially like kids or games that are geared for kids. And I saw this mentioned somewhere. I don't have notes on where it was, but you guys were thinking about using blockchain to stop child predators. Is that what you're thinking is the KYC kind of portion?
Well, I would like to distinguish between ID and KYC, right? ID is actually a very simple thing. Either you're Matthew or you're not, right?
Gotcha.
No. But it's a very important thing to know, right? Because if we have one thing, well, what does it matter if we do KYC and AML and all that stuff on top? If at the bottom of that part is somebody unidentifiable, right? So that's the key thing that we deliver, the ID at the base layer, not as something
Gotcha.
you do in a silo for your particular game or for your particular e-commerce shop or whatever, right? We put it on the entire system so that everybody can identify themselves to each other, right? And I think for me, that's a layer one obligation. It's not a layer two afterthought if you want a really broad network. Layer two is KYC, where I need to know something very specific about you. What is your financial position?
Right.
What is your experience in trading derivatives or something like that? That is typical layer two, because you can't predict all of the different KYC. I mean, the KYC for trading a complicated financial derivative is completely different to you wanting to be a member of the local paddle club, right? But those guys will still do some KYC. Do you live in the area? Call it whatever,
right.
So you can't really predict the millions of versions of KYC, but you can predict that each of them will need that KYC on top of, and then we're building a container around it that will make it easy for people to do this, to populate it with questions, get the answers they want, maybe translate that into a digital certificate that may be a requirement to enter into a certain smart contract if you want to access control against people that, let's say you have a complicated DeFi product, right? And the regulators say, well, you got to make sure that people actually understand what they're doing, right? That's what they're doing to us all the time in TradFi, If you can't prove that you actually check that guy understands what it is to trade a future, you shouldn't let him trade, right? And those kind of requirements will come whether we like it or not, right? So here you can say, well, in an equivalent thing, you could make a questionnaire, a little course, whatever, on this particular DeFi product, You answer some multiple choice questions, which is the way that you do it in the TradFi sector. Once you're through with that, that can result in a result, passed or not passed. If you're passed, you can do a digital certificate, and that certificate could be a precondition for accessing the particular smart contract in the DeFi project. So that's just one example, right? But you're right that in a broader sense, what we're doing here, when we take your ID and pass that through a pretty normal IDing process that you would know from online interactions with the public sector, etc. There's some companies specialized in this, and you have a personal document, you do a biometric, and then we know that you're Matthew, and we know that that's actually none of anybody else's business. So we're not going to put it right up on the blockchain and say, hey, come and have a look at Matthew, right? But we will put in your possession, in your wallet, the equivalent of that ID. And that means that you can choose to release some aspects of that ID if somebody asks you, So let's say you and I wanted to do a piece of business, right? And I say, well, that sounds great, Matthew, but if you're gonna pay me some money for something I want to sell, call it NFT or something, you might say, hey, I'd just like to know that you are Lars before I pay you. So if there's some problem with the goods I buy from you, I can come back to you, and I can then show you exactly from my ID what you want to see. I can tell you my name, I can tell you my nationality, I can tell you my age, I can tell you all of the stuff that's implicit in an ID. But let's say the only thing I wanted to sell you was a bottle of liquor, for argument's sake, right? The only thing I need to know is that you're over 18, right? I don't need to know your social security number, your private address, all of the information like you would do today in a kiosk, right? So there you have something that we call zero knowledge range proofs, which are, for example, I can prove to you that I'm over 18. I don't have to tell you that I'm 59, but I can prove to you I'm over 18 because that's what you need to know, right? And I think those kind of range proofs are much more elegant, like Europe. I don't really want to prove I'm from Europe, I'm from Scandinavia, right? And that will all pass as true information. So you can rely on that information. If, however, being Danish, I say I'm Swedish, they'll immediately get flagged and say, hey, this guy is not telling you the truth according to the identification he has, right? And I think that kind of, and if you go into gaming, let's say you have play to earn games, where you are right that the sad consequence of some of these games, you hear all this stuff that, it enables people to make a living in the third, in emerging markets and places like that. Right. And that's to some extent true, but the sad truth below that is that often leads to child factories and people sitting, working for $1 a day somewhere while some guy in the back takes all the profits, right? So if, for example, you wanted an age control on a game and saying, this person has to be over 18 or 16 or whatever you want to call it. Also, of course, in gambling, that's a requirement in most countries. Right. So again, you can use that to access control if there's certain users you don't want, right? You might also not want users from a given jurisdiction, right? You might not want as I said, people under a certain age, right? So that's the way to look at this ID. It's actually giving you the power to control what you want to tell people. But of course, if you don't want to tell me, for example, what I want to know, then I can also say, well, that's fine, Matthew, but then we're not going to do that piece of business, right? But you have the ability to show me with 100% guarantee that it's true, whatever I ask you inside those ID framework. And that's a big deal. Because, on social media, all these fake profiles, all these bots, all this nonsense. I mean, 20 times a year, or maybe 10 times a year, there's somebody making a fake Facebook profile of me, right? They take my picture, they download my CV, they post my most recent 20 posts, right? My friends who they can also see, if you sent me $200, I'll give you a free Bitcoin or some nonsense like
Right,
that.
right.
It happens again and again. And the only thing I can do to protect me and the people getting potentially duped by this is by asking 30 friends to go in and report the profile. If I'm lucky, they might shut it down. But in the meantime, they can do a lot of damage. Now, if you had something as simple as an idea as I described there, it wouldn't happen, right? So I think it's a really big deal for trust and for fraud prevention and for people not getting screwed over, right?
This is a beautiful idea. I mean, blockchain I knew had some possibilities, but this is fantastic as far as, in a world of Dogecoin, these little just what I say is fly by night to get money. You had Elon Musk promoted up, it went up quite a bit, people made money, and then now it's down, I think 5 cents, a coin. And an actual tangible use of blockchain like this, man, I love it. I absolutely love it. I know a bit about blockchain, enough to hurt myself, but that's about it. But David, what questions you got for Lars?
Well, I was really interested in hearing what kind of predictions you have for your company going forward. I viewed the website and I saw there's a lot of opportunities to become like partners and stuff. And so I was wondering if you could share with us the predictions for the upcoming year.
Well, the prediction is that we will eventually have built a very great blockchain.
What? Hang on just a second, Lars. You're breaking up.
Scientists that understand the crypto. Am I there? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you back up though and repeat what you just?
Again.
Yeah, if you could just back up and repeat what you said.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's doing it again. Right when he's repeating it. Uh-oh.
Yeah, right now the camera's frozen. Is it the same for you?
Yeah. And folks, if you're listening to us live, as we said at the top, Lars is around the world. And so, of course, this happens sometimes. It looks like he's completely frozen this time. But these little breaks in here, we're catching.
No.
Oh.
I think he's back.
Yeah, Lars, if you can hear us, you're completely frozen and we can't hear you, sir. If you could just refresh your browser, it should bring you right back in. The use of blockchain for this, the way he just explained it, I see so much potential in it.
Yeah, I wonder if it can be developed past.
Hang on, let me mute. There's Lars. Just a second.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, Matthew is on phone with our guest star. He did just inform y'all, like we did at the beginning, he is across the world. So some technical difficulties can happen. But thank you for joining in with us. And, we're currently having a conversation about blockchain and the possibilities of it with Mr. Lars Sire.
Back here? Okay. So your question was, what do I expect the future of Concordium, right? Should I go with that answer?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So, what I certainly predict is we'll build a really great blockchain, right? Because we have thought very carefully about, this combination between, let's say, the old world and the new world, which will, without question, converge also in a regulatory sense over the coming years. And then we have built it on very solid cryptography and a more corporate tech process like what I was used to when we were building these internet platforms back in the day in the bank. We had like 800, 900 programs. So we'll build a great blockchain, that's for sure. Now, building a great product is not necessarily the same as building a great success, right? So it's very much, of course, about can we can we get that message out to people, how important some of these particular USPs are? Can we get out to them how good the technology is, and there's actually true scalability here? Because I think there's a big problem with the whole Ethereum ecosystem, to be honest, right? I mean, you have a blockchain at the core that can do 15 transactions per second, right? Now, if you have ever been involved in traditional finance or online trading and something, that's a ridiculous number, right? We're doing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of quotes that have to go through every second, right? So that's like a joke. But unfortunately, because of the very strong following there is for this, so ways to fix it twos and fix the problem, because you're just adding complexity and adding more points of failure, right? So getting that technology is absolutely crucial, and I hope that increasingly will begin to also look at the technology they choose for building their use cases, etc. Right? Many people now are just chasing around. Who'll give me the biggest grant? I'll build on this, that, and the other. Just give me a grant. And then you see the occasional blow up, which you're going to see more of, I can tell you. But look at Terra, right? I mean, there were hundreds of good projects building on that blockchain, hundreds of millions, if not billions, thrown in that direction. And all of a sudden, the whole thing goes poof because the core infrastructure is not what it should be, right? And I really think people need to recognize the risk of building on poor technology or poor cryptography, right? So that's very much about getting that message out there. What are we particularly looking for? We're kind of looking for anything, to be honest, because we are layer one. We are use case agnostic, just like Ethereum is not built originally for any particular use case, and you can build pretty much what takes your fancy on there. Well, this is the same here, I mean, I would love to do some games, but I also love to do an NFT marketplace. I love to do big provenance, industrial use cases. Good at become to the end consumer. This is a use case agnostic blockchain. At the moment, a little more interest from that, a little more interest from that. Like more by chance, maybe we have better networks in those sectors. We see a lot of ESG use cases, sort of zero carbon tracking. We see increasingly recently some games coming in. We see various people that sort of core data needs, nothing sexy, but they just want their data secure. And that's actually where I think the real business is here, because, trade and trade an expensive NFT with a great artist, but it's fairly low transaction, right? Where the big transactions is in big tracking of big industrial use cases where they actually both can see the benefit of keeping their data completely secure, having a better overview over their data structure, and increasingly will also be met by legal requirements that it's not just enough to save copies of your database. You actually need to prove that you haven't manipulated it subsequently, right? And again, that's an obvious use case for blockchain. So we're just trying to create a great layer one, and for some people, like, oh, layer one, that's so last year. Now we're on to gaming or use cases, but it's not last year. The layer one problem is not solved. You're
it's not.
If you think the layer one is solved. Ethereum with 15 transactions a second is not a solution. Other things that are extremely insecure break down all the time. Very few nodes, doesn't have the security of a blockchain. None mentioned, none forgotten. But the layer one problem is not solved, and that's what we're trying to solve. Because if you don't have a foundation for all these smart ideas, you have nothing, right? You're building nice palaces, but on sand, right? And that's not a great idea.
I love that.
So that's what we're trying to do. Now, you are referring to how do we like to interact with people? Well, first of all, we We try to, of course, help them out as much as possible. There's actually somebody you can reach here. You can call our teams and speak to them and get the assistance that you need. We have grant programs. If we think it's sufficiently interesting and people need some dollars to get started, we will consider that. If it's more progressed use cases. I also have another hat. I have a family office, so I invest in a lot of blockchain use cases. So if I see something interesting, I might also do a personal investment. But so at the end of the day, we try to make it attractive and try to assist people that want to build, right? But we're really not saying, oh, you have to be from this industry or you have to be from that industry, because in my view, that's not the idea of a blockchain. A blockchain should really be also for one day to be able to create synergies between all these different businesses. I mean, the internet is not only for gaming or only for the automotive industry or only for financial services. It's the internet, right? And ultimately, all these various industries benefit from being on the same network. So, in my view, a really good blockchain should have ambitions to be something like that. I actually think there's a lot of parallels to the internet and things we're building now, both are and all the stuff people build on top. So that's the Google and Facebook and the actual well-functioning internet, or in this case, a well-functioning blockchain, right?
Yeah, of course. I definitely love, trying to make sure that it's a solution for that level 1, because, being raised up, and Matthew's known me since a kid, Band-Aids don't solve issues. They cover them up, or, something that makes it look better or to get past it. So finding a solution, like you said, creates a great foundation for the future. And I love to hear that.
Well, I think it's critical because, the one thing that let's take Ethereum that has got going for it is it was an early starter. I knew the guys before they even started it, right? So I saw it from when it was like a few guys in a villa down in Zug in Zurich, close to where I live. So I went to see those guys half a year before they launched Ethereum, right? So I kind of know where it came from, right? And they were very smart people, no question. They're very smart and very visionary people, maybe not the kind of technology build process that we were used to when we built our internet trading platforms, but that we also started small, so that's fine. But today, to be honest, the lack of scalability, the crazy gas fees, the now potentially solving the energy problem with the merge, right? But it doesn't really change things in the short term. I mean, it's pretty bizarre when you have blockchains out there that are far more modern, far more thought through, and have much bigger scalability, that you still have a large community that insists that everything has to go back to Ethereum, right? Now, because Ethereum obviously can't handle that, then you have to make a lot of fixes. You have to build layer 2s with less nodes so they can run more transactions, but less nodes means less security. You have CK rollups, you have all sorts of technology fixes to it, but actually we're beginning to look like the old world now, because now again we have multiple things that can go wrong around us, right? The beauty of a well-designed blockchain is that there's nothing that really can go wrong in it, right? Because it's built on the cryptography as simple functions, and it's not going to have all sorts of layer 2s and basically things to the basic problem that Ethereum doesn't work. It's a little bit crazy, but it's a very loyal community, and I understand it because they grew up with it. They built some of the tooling and some of the use cases. But I think ultimately there will be a shift towards more modern blockchain, not just ours, but things that actually work, right? Because it doesn't make much sense the way that the community is doing it now. I mean, and I think it's a little bit mind-boggling. You have everybody talking with the new future economy, we're innovative, we're disruptive, and then you choose a blockchain at the core that doesn't work, right? It's a little bit like saying, we're Formula One, we're the top of motorsport, but we do insist on driving a Ford Model T, right?
That's
Sorry about that to the Ethereum fans out there. It's a great community, but open your eyes to what else is out there, and you still think Ethereum's the best. Be my guest. But there are a lot of other solutions out there that I think scale better and are much more secure than relying on layer 2s, right?
Definitely. And that's one thing. Another thing that early on, a lot of people, had that misconception of, well, it's unhackable. There's no way you're going to lose your money. And of course, now we hear several times a year, that they have been hacked, and not that that's the blockchain's fault. It's usually the platform's fault. But you talking about building a secure layer 1, and of course, forgive me if I'm wrong, then that means that anyone that builds on top of you guys, or maybe I'm wrong, they are going to have to come up with the way that the network, so to speak, that does all the verification, or is that what you guys are coming up with? Because I know they have to have a currency to pay these folks on those levels. So can you explain that to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we deliver the ID component, right? So if you want to be sure that you don't have anonymity in your network, and you want to be sure, for example, if an artist is issuing an NFT, he can attach his ID, so you're sure that actually comes from him. And then I think that in itself, there's so much fraud going on in that space out there, with people just stealing artwork, stealing various rights, etc., and put them on an NFT and mint them on an anonymous account, right? So if you have the need for those kind of things, that you want users to be able to identify themselves, you want them to be able to identify themselves to each other in various social or business interactions. You want to be sure that you can prove the original products and various virtual assets. You want to, that's where you should look at us, right? If you don't feel the need for that, then you can use a number of blockchains, right? But at the same time, you also, as I said before, with Terra as a recent horror example, you're also well advised to look closely at the quality of the cryptography and the tech that you're building on, right? Because you might build a great use case, but if you're building it on a crappy blockchain, the whole thing may blow up in your face, right? So, and I think once bigger corporates really begin to take this seriously, there's no question that they will look at tech due diligence in a completely different way than what we've kind of been used to in this space, where anything goes, But I also distinguish, as you rightly said, some of the original blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, the core blockchain is very hard to hack, and it actually hasn't been hacked successfully. And that's because it's based on some very simple, what we call cryptographic primitives, Cryptographic primitive is a cryptographic function that has proven that it doesn't get broken easily, right? So, I mean, a basic blockchain is really not very complicated, right? You have a couple of cryptographic factors in there, but if you build that on well-known stuff and make no mistake, Bitcoin, for example, is built on stuff that we've known for 20 or more years, right? It's just old wine on new bottles, right? And if you keep but I mean, but that's fair enough. You take stuff that works and has worked for a long time, you put it together in a slightly more inspiring way, and all of a sudden it kicks off. I mean, people tried to do Bitcoin back in the early 90s, right? It was called something else, but you have systems that are very close to what Bitcoin, and this has happened. Years for Bitcoin, and there's no question also is right. But so those are hard to hack. There's many of the stuff that is on top of it that on top of it, not built very well. Actually, more complicated than the blockchain itself, and then you have this slightly asymmetric risk there. You've built something crappy, but you hype it well. It gets up into the billions of dollars, and it's sitting there like a steak in front of a bunch of piranha fish, because there's some hackers out there that see that value and can actually benefit hugely from destroying such a project, right? And these hackers are far smarter than the guys that built the project, right? And that's not that's not a nice place to be if you got a few $1 billion you want to protect. And then that's why I'm worried you're going to see many more cases before this stabilizes around some really well-built blockchains. But you can't specifically blame Bitcoin and Ethereum for that, because they are actually appropriately built blockchains. What goes wrong is always the stuff that people build on top. What you potentially could blame Ethereum for is that you're forced to build on top, because Ethereum doesn't have the scalability, so people are kind of forced to use some of these not so great or not so secure solutions. So in that way, it's unfortunate anyway, right? Because you can't just run your thing directly on Ethereum. And blockchain nirvana is, once we have blockchains where you can do all of your transactions on the blockchain, right? So you don't have to run a compromise with parts of your data, right? Now that obviously requires a huge scalability, which nobody has today, including ourselves. But it can, in our view, be solved through what we call sharding. A large number of parallel systems that contain part of the blockchain. Now that's not very difficult. That's just basically copy paste of the code. But what is difficult is to get these shards to talk to each other, right? Because you don't have a system where these 1,000 people can talk to each other, and these 1,000 people can talk to each other, but they can't talk across the shard, right? So that's a real problem of sharding, which is a very complicated cryptographic problem. But we believe it can be solved, and we have some really cool scientists working on solving these problems, and they promise me they will solve it, so I have to trust them. But if you can solve that, and you can gain near infinite scalability on a true blockchain, then you have something really great, and that's got to be the ambition for the space, and it certainly is for us, right?
I can definitely see why you're behind this project. Like I said, I see a lot of potential in this, and benefit, to so many different industries. But David, you got another question for him?
Actually, I did, but he actually addressed it earlier. What about, did you have another one that he hasn't addressed?
I'm still not quite understanding on one thing. You're starting a blockchain where, on most blockchains where we've talked about the peer-to-peer and the confirming from one node to another. Well, with your shards and nodes, where are those computers going to be located? Or are they?
This is the same. I mean, apart from, I believe, you can build a quality product with quality tech and quality science. That would be better than a project with less quality on those. But the base of this is, as you know, another distributed blockchain. It is distributed nodes that do the consensus layer. It is blocks and hash functions that tie together the blocks. It does have a token to incentivize these parties.
Okay.
In that sense, it's exactly like any other blockchain, but that's like saying, my car is exactly like every other car, right? I mean,
right.
It does have four wheels, but it can be anything from a Fiat 500 to a Bugatti Veyron, and that's kind of. But in that sense, we have four wheels like the other cars as well, because that is the way that a blockchain is and should work. We have one more thing I might want to mention, is we have an additional layer above the consensus layer. The traditional consensus layer defines the blocks by the nodes agreeing on it and choosing a leader for that block, right? We have an additional layer, which is called a finality layer, right? Which does an additional set of confirmations of this, and through that agree that this last block is actually like a new Genesis block, right?
Okay.
Prior to that block, even if you gain control of the system, you wouldn't be able to change any transactions prior to that. And we do that as a separate layer for each block, which means, in essence, every new block is the beginning of the rest of eternity, right? But you cannot roll back anything below that block, which also means that if, in the very unlikely scenario, because of course there are lots of things around to prevent that, but if somebody should gain control of the system with bad intention, well, they could not roll anything back prior to that, which means that you could easily restart the blockchain from up to that point going forward. Now, that's very different from like a proof of work consensus mechanism, where in principle, if you gain control, you get sort of 51% power over the system, you can actually, at least theoretically, roll back everything to even to the Genesis block, right? You could argue, why would you do it? Because you'll probably destroy all the value in the system by doing it. If we rolled back Bitcoin and said, now David, Matthew, and Lars has a third of all Bitcoin in the world, sorry to the rest of you guys, probably people wouldn't assign high values to that Bitcoin anymore. But there could be political systems, there could be nation states that don't like don't like something like Bitcoin. In fact, we know there are quite a few nation states that don't like Bitcoin. And although it would be expensive for them, it would be doable, right? Because they don't have this finality. They have this thing called probabilistic finality, which means that after a certain number of blocks, it's very unlikely to get rolled back. And it gets very, very unlikely, but it's not final. I mean, at least for generally in blockchain, in Bitcoin, you assume you got to wait for 6 blocks to be reasonably secure your transaction is not in the wrong fork or something like that. Well, apart from that being 6 times 10 minutes, which is a little bit problematic if you're buying a newspaper down the kiosk, right? Because you don't understand to hang around for an hour waiting for that transaction to go through, right? But it still is only probabilistic, which means that it's probably going to be okay. Whereas the type of finality we have is deterministic. Once it's at that level, that's where it cannot be rolled back. Now, the difference between those two may sound a little academic, but if you're a financial institution, for example, that want to commit, billions of dollars onto trading, it sounds a lot better that you're 100% secure than you're 99.99% secure, right? So, that's an important thing, which on very few blockchains. I think Algorand has something similar, but there's not a lot of people that are dealing with that, and it's an in the industry finality is not on the blockchain. So, yeah.
And that's
actually, just to finish on finality, because it's quite passion for me. Because in the TradFi system, where I spent 3 decades, we don't have finality. People think you've done a deal when you've done a deal. No, you don't. You have like 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to settlement. A foreign exchange deal. Foreign exchange deal settles 2 value dates later. So you don't have finality. You haven't done a deal when you've done a deal. You can still roll this stuff back, right? And this creates a lot of problems. You have to know your counterpart very well to be sure that they don't do it. You have to do a lot of credit checks. You have to apply capital for those periods of risk. And with true finality built into those systems, you actually would solve a lot of those problems. And I think that could be a really good icebreaker into the TradFi industry at some point, because this is something banks and financial institutions really keenly for capital and how they use it efficiently. And this would allow for a much more efficient use of capital, at least in trading concepts, and of course much more certainty, because when a deal is done, it's done when you have that layer. But it's not like that in the financial sector today. When a deal is done, it's not done. It's done 2 days later, 3 days later, right? So just a finer point, but I think very important.
That brings up a case in point. I do a lot of writing for my day job and blog posts and everything. And then when I get paid, sometimes it goes through 2 to 3 days of verification or an approval. It'd be nice to be paid instantly, And that was the thing that I was missing. The whole key I was missing with Concordium is that underlying token. That's where I wasn't. And but like I said earlier, this really appeals to me. Not that I'm an investor or anything, but that I have a company that would have the use for this. But I just see this such of the potential as we're moving up in these years, because we always need more of the security with our money, especially these days, because like you said earlier, hackers are getting, they're 10 times smarter than I am, or 50 times smarter, and a lot of them have nothing but time on their hands, and when they're told that, oh, this can't be broke, their mission in life is to break it. And so that's where something like this comes in, where you've got those layers like you were just talking about, and I really, and I want to know this for myself, but where can folks follow Concordium to keep up on the news of this? Website, social media, and any of that stuff that you want to share.
You just fell out there, but you're asking how you could learn more about Concordium, or?
Yeah, where they can follow, they can learn more.
Well, I would say a good place is actually go a little old school back to Web 2 and go to our website, concordium.com, right? So there you can find all of our various channels that we talk through, and we, use all the usual suspects, Telegram, GitHub, Reddit, whatever, right? But there's a good overview of it, and there's a very good overview over the project, and there's also information about the grant program. If, for example, you have a use case you might want to bring to us, but you'd like a little help to get started, there's a lot of information about how do the smart contracts work, a lot of etc. If you're a hardcore coder, concordium.com, right? That should give you then the pointers to go to more detail elsewhere. Yeah?
Right. That's the easiest way to go. Send them to the website. The links are there, so that way you ain't got to go at this _ this. That's the best place to go. And, of course, sir, we have really enjoyed your visit tonight. I really wish that the connection had been better. Nobody's fault. That's the web for us. Because there was sometimes when you were given some really good information, it kind of cut out. And so, folks, I do recommend that you go to the website, read more about this project. I think it's really cool. Like I said earlier, know enough about blockchain to hurt myself on it, but the potential of it is fantastic. And so I do suggest that you go and check it out. And don't go anywhere, sir. We want to say goodbye off the air. We're going to close it out here. David, did you have any final words? I got one more question for him if he isn't frozen.
No, just the standard one. I was going to ask him the same one we always ask all of our interviewees.
Okay. Okay. Usually that's my job, but go ahead.
No. I mean, to us.
Oh, I got you. Well, but it looks like he's frozen again. I hope we didn't lose him.
Fingers crossed.
Give him a minute. Lars, if you can hear us, try refreshing one more time for me, please. Oh,
loading in.
I didn't hear anything about the last 2 minutes, but I guess we're kind of done with the interview. Anyway.
Yes, sir. We were wrapping it up. I just was thanking you for being on here, and I did have one more question for you. If we got the connection.
It's really bad now, but try.
All right. It's just, and this would be an interesting one. I hope we get your answer. Is that if you could go back in time and give young Lars one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'll say, don't listen to me. Find your own way. You need to find your own way and make your mistakes. I think that's very important, right? So I wouldn't actually give myself an awful lot of advice. Say just go for it, man, and don't be shy.
I love it.
So
That's great advice.
Yep, I've asked that question over 50 times, and that's one of my favorite ones. That was a good, unique answer. Just you gotta earn your way, boy. Well, Lars, it's been a very special pleasure tonight. I wish it had been a better connection, so everybody would have heard everything you had to say. Maybe we'll have, once you guys get a little bit further on the project, we'd love to have you back. But I'm going to end it here. Hopefully you're still with us. We'd just like to say goodbye off the air.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, that does it for us. You have been into the Geekverse one more time. And we will see you all next Sunday night at 9 p.m. Central. Thanks, everyone.